In the raw, sun-scorched territory of Montana, a man's worth was measured by the land he held and the woman he chose. For the town of Redemption Creek, that choice seemed obvious. Annabelle Rosewood was a vision of prairie sunshine, with hair like spun gold, and eyes the color of a summer sky. Every rancher, every drifter, every hopeful soul vied for her attention. But a quiet stranger, a man with haunted eyes named Wyatt Harrison, looked past the sun. He looked into the shadows, where her sister Josephine lived, a woman defined not by beauty, but by the jagged scars that marred her skin. This is the story of why he turned from perfection and chose the woman no one else could bear to see. Wyatt Harrison's arrival in Redemption Creek was as quiet as the dust settling after a sudden gust of wind. His reputation, however, preceded him like a thunderclap. Men spoke his name in the dusty confines of the saloon, their voices a mixture of reverence and caution. Harrison had bought the old Broken Spur Ranch, a sprawling, neglected piece of land that had broken the backs of 3 previous owners. A man would need more than coin to tame that land. He would need grit forged in hellfire. Whispers said Harrison had found his in the war fighting under Sherman, a detail that made folks straighten their backs a little whenever he rode past. His presence was an immediate disruption to the town's delicate social ecosystem. A man of his stature landed, respected and unattached, was a prize. And in Redemption Creek there was only one prize worthy of such a man, Annabelle Rosewood. Annabelle was the town's undisputed jewel. She moved with an effortless grace that seemed to defy the rugged landscape, her laughter like the chime of a church bell on a clear Sunday morning. Her hair, a cascade of brilliant gold, caught the sunlight in a way that made men stop and stare, their hats held over their hearts, as if pledging allegiance. She was the daughter of old Patrick Rosewood, a man whose hands were gnarled from a lifetime of farming, but whose eyes held a weary pride in his beautiful, perfect daughter. Then there was Josephine. Josephine, or Jo, as she preferred, existed in the periphery, a figure sketched in charcoal against the vibrant oil painting of her sister. Where Annabelle was light, Jo was shadow. Where Annabelle's skin was flawless porcelain, Jo's was a roadmap of tragedy. A terrible fire in their youth had claimed half her face and one of her hands, leaving a tapestry of puckered, discolored skin that drew the eye and then quickly repelled it. People didn't mean to be cruel, not overtly, but their pity was a constant suffocating blanket. They spoke to her while looking at her shoulder, their gazes skittering away from her scars, as if the sight itself were a source of pain. And so she had learned to become invisible. She wore her hair long on one side, a dark curtain to hide the worst of the damage. She kept her scarred hand tucked into the pocket of her drab dress, her movements economical and quiet, while Annabelle held court on the porch swing, enchanting suitors with stories and smiles. Jo was in the barn, her good hand expertly mending a leather harness, or in the kitchen, her mind focused on the precise alchemy of flour and water that kept the household running. She possessed a competence born of necessity, a strength forged in the crucible of other people's discomfort. Wyatt Harrison saw all of this in his first week. He wasn't a man for town socials or idle gossip at the general store, but he was a keen observer. He saw the way the ranchers, from young buckaroos to weathered landowners like Bartholomew Thorne, preened and postured for Annabelle's favor. He saw Annabelle accept their adoration as her due, a queen graciously receiving tribute from her subjects. And he saw Jo moving silently in the background, her eyes a deep, intelligent hazel, missing nothing. Their first proper encounter was not over teacups on the rosewood porch, but over a sick horse at the Broken Spur. A strange ailment had swept through his small herd, and Doc Adams, more practiced with human maladies, was at a loss. It was Sheriff Miller who suggested the Rosewood girl, not the pretty one, the sheriff clarified, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near the corral fence. The other one? Josephine. Her pa says she has a feel for livestock that borders on witchcraft. Wyatt rode to the Rosewood farm, the imposing figure of his black stallion causing the chickens to scatter. Annabelle met him on the porch, a vision in pale yellow, her smile dazzling. "Mr. Harrison," she cooed. "What a pleasant surprise. Has our humble homestead finally captured your curiosity?" "I've come to see your sister," Wyatt stated plainly, his voice a low baritone that held no room for pleasantries. Annabelle's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Josephine, why whatever for? Is there a chore you need doing?" The implication was clear. Josephine was for work, not for conversation. "My horse is sick. I was told she could help." Josephine emerged from the shadows of the barn, wiping her good hand on a rag. She wore a simple brown dress, smudged with dirt, and something that smelled of hay and herbs. She didn't offer a greeting, merely looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching, a rare thing for anyone in town, let alone a woman who was used to being ignored. The scarred side of her face was turned toward him, a silent challenge. "What are the symptoms?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, even melodic. Wyatt described the animal's lethargy, the fever, the strange cough. He found himself speaking to her as an equal, a fellow professional, a stark contrast to the stilted, flowery compliments everyone else offered her sister. Jo listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't seem to notice his gaze, lingering on her, not on her scars, but on the intense focus in her eyes. "It sounds like lung fever," she said finally, "but the cough is wrong. Let me see the animal." As she gathered a small bundle of herbs and tinctures from a dusty shelf in the barn, Annabelle hovered nearby. "Oh, Jo, must you? It's so dirty." "Mr. Harrison, perhaps you'd like to wait on the porch with me. I can fetch you some lemonade." Wyatt's gaze shifted from the beautiful sister to the capable one. "No, thank you, Miss Rosewood. I'll accompany your sister." The ride to the broken spur was quiet. Jo rode with a sturdy competence that surprised him. At his ranch, she approached the suffering stallion with a calm that soothed the agitated animal. Her touch was gentle but firm, her good hand running along its neck while her scarred one, which she used with a slight awkwardness, checked the heat of its flank. She didn't hide her damaged hand from him. She simply used it, another tool in her arsenal. She diagnosed the problem within minutes. Not lung fever, but a poisoning from a patch of loca weed he hadn't known grew in his north pasture. She produced a vial of dark liquid, and with Wyatt's help, administered it to the horse. "Keep him warm and give him fresh water with a spoonful of molasses," she instructed, her eyes on the animal. "He should be on his feet by morning." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brutal strokes of orange and purple, Wyatt stood beside her. He felt a strange sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before the war. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. Josephine finally looked at him, her full, unshielded gaze. The setting sun caught the ridges of her scars, casting them in sharp relief. She looked fierce and fragile and beautiful in a way he couldn't yet define. "My father will send a bill," she said, her voice soft. "But tell me, Mr. Harrison, you fought in the war." It wasn't a question. "I did." "You carry your own scars, then. They're just better hidden." Before he could respond, she had turned and mounted her horse, riding back towards the town that worshipped her sister and shunned her leaving Wyatt Harrison standing in the twilight, feeling as though he had just been truly seen for the first time in a decade. He had come seeking a cure for his horse, but he had found something infinitely more compelling, a woman who understood that the deepest wounds are not always visible. Word of Josephine's success at the Broken Spur spread through Redemption Creek like a prairie fire. It was a curious piece of gossip, a deviation from the usual narrative. For a moment, the town's attention shifted from Annabel's beauty to her sister's uncanny skill. Mrs. Gable, the town's primary purveyor of news and speculation, discussed it at length over the counter of the general store. Can you imagine Wyatt Harrison himself riding all the way out there just for her? She'd say, her voice dripping with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The attention made Jo deeply uncomfortable. She was accustomed to the shadows, finding a strange comfort in their anonymity. Now, when she walked through town, she felt eyes on her, not with the usual quick aversion, but with a new, probing curiosity. It was in many ways worse. Annabel, for her part, treated the incident as a charming anomaly. "My dear sister, always so useful with her little hobbies," she would say to her admirers, framing Jo's competence as a quaint rustic pastime, like quilting or preserving jams. It was a subtle yet effective way of reasserting the natural order of things. Wyatt, however, had no interest in the town's narrative. He found himself manufacturing reasons to ride to the Rosewood farm. A fence needed mending, and he sought Patrick Rosewood's advice on the best timber, knowing full well it was Jo who managed the farm's supply and repairs. He came to ask about crop rotation, directing his questions to the father, but watching the daughter whose quiet interjections always held the true wisdom. During these visits, Annabel would invariably appear offering refreshments, and conversation her presence a bright, insistent flower, demanding to be noticed. She would talk about the upcoming town dance, about a new bolt of fabric from St. Louis, about anything and everything that occupied her world of charm and social standing. Wyatt was polite a gentleman in his responses, but his focus would drift. He watched Jo as she worked her movements, efficient and sure. He saw the way she calmed a nervous mare with a soft word, the meticulous precision with which she sharpened a scythe, the intelligence in her eyes as she calculated yields and weather patterns. He was a man who had built his life and survived a war on foundations of stone reliability, strength, and unwavering truth. He saw those same qualities in Josephine. In Annabel, he saw a beautiful facade, a house built of painted wood that might not withstand a storm. One blistering afternoon, he arrived to find Patrick and Jo struggling with a broken water pump, the cornerstone of the farm's irrigation. Patrick, his face flushed with effort, was on the verge of giving up. Annabel fanned herself on the porch, offering words of encouragement that were as useless as a screen door on a submarine. "Oh, Papa, do be careful. You'll have a fit in this heat," she called out. Wyatt dismounted and rolled up his sleeves without a word. "Let me take a look, Patrick." He and Jo fell into a natural rhythm. She diagnosed the problem, a sheared pin in the piston assembly, while he provided the brute strength to disassemble the heavy iron casing. They worked in near silence, communicating with grunts, nods, and the shared language of practical problem-solving. Her scarred hand pointed to the brake, her touch unhesitating on the greasy metal. He noticed she had calluses on her good hand that were as thick as his own. Annabel brought them water. "My, you two look like a pair of blacksmiths," she said, her laugh a little too bright. "Mr. Harrison, you must be exhausted. Please come rest in the shade." "We're almost done," Wyatt replied, not looking up from his work. He could feel Jo's presence beside him, a solid, grounding force. There was no artifice in her, no performance. There was only the task at hand and the quiet determination to see it through. As they finally seated the new pin and the pump gushed water with a satisfying groan, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced another visitor. It was Bartholomew Thorne, the wealthiest rancher in the county. Thorne was a man whose ambition was as vast as the Montana sky. He owned the Dominion Cattle Company, and it was said he wouldn't be satisfied until he owned every acre from Redemption Creek to the mountains. He was large and loud, with a politician's smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. Thorne had made it no secret that he considered Annabel Rosewood the perfect accessory for his growing empire. He rode up on a magnificent white stallion, a stark contrast to Wyatt's rugged black. "Rosewood!" he boomed, dismounting with a flourish. "Annabel, my dear, you're as radiant as ever." His gaze swept over the scene, dismissing Patrick and Joe, and landing on Wyatt with a flicker of possessive challenge. "Harrison, didn't expect to find you playing mechanic." "The pump was broken," Wyatt said evenly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "A man of your stature ought to pay people for such tasks," Thorne said, his tone condescending. He turned his full attention back to Annabel. "I've come to personally invite you and your family to the annual Cattleman's Ball, and Annabel, I would be honored if you would reserve the first dance for me." Annabel blushed, her eyes sparkling with triumph. This was the world she understood. "Why, Mr. Thorne, I would be delighted." Thorne's gaze flickered to Joe, a brief, dismissive glance that took in her scars and her dirt-smudged dress. It was the look she had seen 1,000 times, a look of polite revulsion. He offered no invitation to her directly. She was simply an appendage of the family, an afterthought. Wyatt saw it all. He saw the flash of pain in Joe's eyes before she expertly masked it with indifference. He saw the smug satisfaction on Thorne's face, and he saw Annabel so caught up in her own victory that she didn't even notice her sister's quiet humiliation. As Thorne continued to charm Annabel, outlining his plans for a grand entrance at the dance, Wyatt walked over to where Joe was coiling a rope near the barn. "You're a good mechanic, Miss Rosewood," he said, his voice low. "It's easier than dealing with people," she replied, not looking at him. "Machines are honest. When they're broken, they show you where." "People aren't so different," Wyatt countered gently. "You just have to know how to look." She finally turned to face him, the curtain of her hair doing little to hide the weariness in her expression. "Most people don't want to look that closely. They prefer the view from the porch." Her words hung in the air between them, a shared and damning indictment of the scene unfolding just a few yards away, where Annabel's bright laughter mingled with Bartholomew Thorne's boisterous pronouncements. Wyatt looked from the performative courtship on the porch to the quiet, scarred woman before him. He saw a foundation of stone, a resilience that the Thornes and Annabels of the world, with all their polish and pomp, could never comprehend. "Some of us," Wyatt said, his gaze holding hers, "prefer to see how things are built." The night of the Redemption Creek Town dance arrived with a nervous energy that settled over the valley like a summer haze. The community hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the drab workaday lives of its inhabitants. For one night, dusty ranchers became dashing gentlemen, and weary farm wives remembered the girls they used to be. For Annabel Rosewood, it was not an escape, but a coronation. She was breathtaking. Her dress was the color of a spring sky, a recent arrival on the stagecoach, and it set off her golden hair and flawless skin to perfection. As she entered the hall on her father's arm, a hush fell over the room. Every eye was on her. She was the sun, and the rest of the town were merely planets orbiting her light. Josephine was there too. She stood near the entrance, a ghost in a simple grey dress that she had made herself. It was modest and well-stitched, but next to Annabel's finery, It looked like a shroud. She had tried to arrange her hair to conceal her scars, but the flickering lantern light was cruel, catching the uneven textures of her skin and casting her face in a landscape of hills and valleys. She saw the familiar pattern of gazes, a glance, a flicker of recognition, and then a hasty, compassionate look away. She had promised her father she would attend, but every moment felt like an ordeal. Her purpose was to be the shadow that made her sister's light seem even brighter. Wyatt Harrison arrived late. He wore a clean shirt and a dark coat, looking more like a solemn judge than a man ready for a celebration. He bypassed the clusters of gossiping townsfolk and the fawning greetings from other landowners. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping past the radiant Annabel, and found Josephine standing alone by the refreshment table, pretending to be engrossed in the selection of punch. Before he could cross the room, however, Bartholomew Thorne intercepted him. "Harrison, glad you could make it," Thorne boomed, clapping a heavy hand on Wyatt's shoulder. "A fine night, a good year for cattle, a good night for celebrating." His eyes darted towards Annabel. "And for claiming what's yours." The music started a lively tune from a trio of fiddlers. As promised, Thorne strode to Annabel, bowed grandly, and swept her onto the dance floor. They were a handsome couple, Thorne large and commanding, Annabel light and graceful. They moved as one, the center of everyone's attention. A collective sigh of approval seemed to ripple through the hall. This was how things should be. The richest man, the most beautiful girl. Wyatt watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked directly to Josephine. She saw him coming, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. She braced herself for a polite, pitying inquiry about her father or the farm. "Miss Rosewood," Wyatt said, his voice cutting through the noise. "May I have this dance?" The question was so unexpected that Jo could only stare at him. Dancers swirled around them, but for a moment their corner of the room was perfectly still. Her mind raced. Did he know what he was asking? To dance with her was to invite scrutiny, to stand in the center of the floor and have everyone stare at her face, her scars. It was a kindness so profound it felt like a cruelty. I don't dance well, Mr. Harrison." She stammered the excuse, flimsy on her tongue. "Neither do I," he said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. "We can be clumsy together." He extended his hand. It was not a gesture of pity, but a simple, direct offer. Hesitantly, she placed her good hand in his. His grip was firm and warm. He did not ask for her scarred hand, saving her the embarrassment of its awkwardness and the pain of its limited mobility. He simply led her onto the floor. As they began to move, a low murmur spread through the crowd. Thorne, spinning Annabel in a confident circle, shot them a look of pure astonishment, which quickly curdled into a sneer. Annabel's smile tightened her perfect rhythm, faltering for a step. She could not comprehend it. Why would he choose the broken sister when the perfect one was right here? Wyatt ignored them all. He focused only on Jo. He was not a gifted dancer, his movements as stiff and practical as his demeanor, but he was steady. He guided her with a quiet confidence that put her at ease. "You're a better dancer than you let on," he said, his voice for her ears alone. "It's easy when you have a partner who isn't afraid to lead," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. They spoke of simple things, the coming harvest, the unpredictability of the weather, the strength of a good horse. But beneath the surface of their words, something else was being built. In the public eye of the entire town, Wyatt Harrison was showing his allegiance. He wasn't choosing beauty or social standing. He was choosing substance. He was choosing her. When the song ended, he didn't immediately release her. He led her away from the crowded floor, not back to the lonely refreshment table, but out the side door, into the cool night air. The moon was high and bright, casting long shadows from the livery stable and the blacksmith's shop. "I needed some air," he said, though they both knew it was an excuse. "The lanterns can be hot," she agreed, grateful for the respite from the 100 pairs of eyes. "It wasn't the lanterns," he said, turning to face her. In the soft moonlight, her scars seemed to soften, less a disfigurement and more a part of the unique geography of her face. "Josephine," he began the first time he had used her full name, "why do you let them treat you like you're invisible?" The question struck her with the force of a physical blow. "It's easier," she whispered the honest answer, escaping before she could stop it. "When people don't see you, they can't hurt you. And they can't love you either," he countered gently. "They can't see the woman who can calm a sick horse with a touch, who understands the land better than men who've worked it for 50 years, who has more strength in her little finger than any of those preening peacocks in there." Tears welled in Joe's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked past her scars to see the person beneath. Inside the hall, the music had stopped. Annabel, flushed with anger and confusion, had pleaded a headache and demanded Thorne take her outside for air. They emerged from the front of the hall just as Wyatt reached out his hand, gentle, and brushed back the curtain of hair that Joe used to hide her face. He didn't flinch. His fingers traced the edge of the largest scar on her cheek, his touch as light as a moth's wing. It was not a touch of curiosity or pity, but of reverence. "This," Wyatt said softly, his eyes locked on hers, "is not a weakness. It's a testament. It shows you survived." From the corner of the building, Annabel watched her heart, a cold stone in her chest. Thorne stood beside her, his face a thundercloud of rage. He saw Wyatt's gesture not as one of tenderness, but as a direct, public insult to him and to Annabel. It was a declaration. Harrison had not only rejected the town's prize, he had chosen the discard. "The man is a fool," Thorne snarled, his voice low and vicious. "And he's a fool who has just made a very powerful enemy." Annabel didn't hear him. She was watching her sister, the sister she had always pitied and protected, and in a secret, ugly part of her heart despised for being a constant reminder of a terrible day. And for the first time, Annabel saw Josephine not as a damaged reflection of herself, but as a rival. The dance of shadows had ended, and a far more dangerous one was about to begin. The dance changed everything. Redemption Creek buzzed with a single unifying topic of conversation: Wyatt Harrison and Josephine Rosewood. The established social order had been upended. Annabel, for the first time in her life, found herself on the periphery of the town's attention. Her suitors became more hesitant, their compliments sounding hollow, even to their own ears. They had all witnessed Wyatt's public declaration. To court Annabel now felt like settling for second-best a prize another better man had already passed over. Her confusion curdled into a bitter resentment, aimed not at Wyatt, but squarely at her sister. The household became a tense, quiet place. Annabel's bright laughter was replaced by clipped, angry words. She saw conspiracy in every shared glance between Joe and their father, every moment of quiet understanding that had always existed between them, but which she now viewed as a betrayal. "I don't understand what he sees in you," Annabel spat one afternoon, cornering Joe in the kitchen where she was kneading bread. "What could you possibly offer a man like that? A broken face and a sharp tongue." "I don't know what you mean," Joe replied, her voice level, refusing to be drawn into a fight. "Don't you?" Annabel's voice rose shrill and laced with a new cruelty. You've always resented me, haven't you? Hiding in the corners, playing the martyr, making me feel guilty. Well, you've finally done it. You've managed to ruin everything." The accusation of guilt struck Joe with an unnerving precision. Guilt was the unspoken ghost that had haunted their family for a decade. It was the foundation of their fractured relationship, the reason Patrick Rosewood looked at Annabel with a love tinged with sorrow, and the reason Joe had borne her scars with such stoic silence. Wyatt continued his visits, but he no longer feigned reasons of farm business. He came for Josephine. They would walk the fields together, their conversations meandering from the practical to the personal. He told her of the war, not of the battles and the glory that other men boasted of, but of the quiet, crushing weight of it, the loss of friends, the struggle to find peace in a world that had moved on. In turn, Jo began hesitantly to speak of her own life, of her love for the land, her fascination with the delicate balance of healing and growth. But on one topic, she remained silent the fire. Whenever Wyatt gently prodded, asking about her past, she would deflect her expression, closing down like a shuttered window. He sensed a deep well of pain there, one she was not yet ready to share. The truth, when it came, was not from her. Wyatt was at the Rosewood farm to help repair a collapsed section of the barn roof. Patrick had gone to town for supplies, and the sisters were working in strained silence at opposite ends of the house. Annabel, restless and agitated, was sorting through a trunk of her mother's old things in the attic. Wyatt was on a ladder nailing new timbers into place when he heard a muffled sob from above. It was followed by the sharp, angry voice of Annabel. "It's just a silly music box. Stop crying over it." He heard Joe's softer, pleading voice. It was Mama's favorite. You know that. Everything was Mama's favorite. Annabel shrieked, her voice cracking with a decade of repressed emotion. "Mama loved you more. Everyone did, even before." Her words trailed off, choked by a sob. Wyatt froze, knowing he was hearing something private, yet unable to move. "That's not true," Jo said, her voice heavy with an old, familiar sadness. "It is true." Annabel's voice was a raw wound. "She gave it to you. She was going to teach you the song. She was with you in the barn. I was jealous. I was so jealous I couldn't stand it." A terrible silence hung in the dusty air. Wyatt felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "I was only 10, Jo." Annabel's voice was a desperate whisper now. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just wanted her to pay attention to me. I took the lantern. I just wanted to scare you to make you come out. I tripped. I didn't mean to drop it in the hay. I ran. I was so scared I just ran and left you there." The confession hung in the air, sucking the very oxygen from the space. The fire. It hadn't been an accident. It had been Annabel. Wyatt felt a surge of cold fury, followed by a profound, aching sorrow for the woman below. Jo had known. All these years she had known that her sister's carelessness, her childish jealousy, had led to the fire that had scarred her for life, and as he now pieced together, likely claimed their mother's life as well. And she had carried that secret, protecting the very person who had destroyed her life. She had allowed the town to pity her, her sister to resent her, her own father to live in a fog of unspoken grief, all to shield Annabel from the consequences of one terrible, selfish act. He quietly climbed down the ladder, his mind reeling. The pieces clicked into place. Annabel's desperate need for constant adoration, her underlying fragility, the subtle ways she belittled Joe's competence, Patrick's sorrowful gaze. It was all a cover for a deep, festering guilt. Later that evening, as the sun set, Wyatt found Jo by the creek that bordered their property. She was skipping stones across the water, her movements mechanical. She didn't seem surprised to see him. He stood beside her for a long time, the silence comfortable between them. "I overheard," he said, finally, his voice soft. "In the barn, I'm sorry." Jo didn't look at him. She watched a flat stone bounce 4 times before sinking into the deep water. "I didn't want you to find out that way." "Why did you protect her?" he asked, the question raw with disbelief and admiration. "Why did you carry that for her?" She finally turned to face him, her eyes clear and filled with a weary wisdom that went far beyond her years. "She was 10 years old, Wyatt. A child. She's lived her entire life terrified that someone would find out. She built a whole world around herself, a perfect, beautiful world, where nothing bad could ever touch her, because she couldn't bear to face the one terrible thing she did. It would break her. And what about you?" He pressed his voice tight. "Hasn't it broken you?" A sad smile touched her lips. "It scarred me," she corrected him gently. "Scars are different. They're a sign of healing, a sign that you were stronger than whatever tried to hurt you. Annabelle, she's the one who's still wounded. She's been bleeding on the inside for 13 years. In that moment, Wyatt's admiration for her solidified into something deeper, something unshakable. He had seen courage on the battlefield, the bravery of men facing cannons and certain death. But this quiet, enduring sacrifice was a form of courage he had never known. It was the strength to absorb the world's cruelty and another's guilt, and to still have enough grace left to forgive them. He reached out and took her scarred hand, not holding it tentatively, but lacing his fingers through hers, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He felt the rough, uneven texture against his own calloused skin. "Josephine Rosewood," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." He understood now. He hadn't chosen the sister in scars and shadows by chance. He had been drawn to her from the very beginning, recognizing in her a resilience that mirrored his own, a soul that had been tested by fire and had not been consumed but forged into something stronger and more true than any superficial beauty could ever be. Bartholomew Thorne was not a man who accepted rejection. In his world, power, wealth, and intimidation were currencies that could purchase anything, land, cattle, and women. Wyatt Harrison's public courtship of Josephine was a personal affront, a challenge to his dominance in the valley. But Thorne was cunning. A direct confrontation with a respected war veteran like Harrison was risky. Instead, he would squeeze him, bleed him dry, and take what he wanted from the fallout. The trouble started subtly. A section of Wyatt's fence was cut, allowing a dozen head of his cattle to wander onto Thorne's vast Dominion ranch, where they were promptly branded with Thorne's mark and absorbed into his herd. When Wyatt confronted him, Thorne feigned ignorance. "Fences break, Harrison. Your stock wanders onto my land, it becomes my stock. That's the law of the range." Then the lifeblood of the broken spur. The creek that flowed down from the mountains began to shrink. Wyatt rode upstream and found the reason: a new, crudely constructed dam on Thorne's property, diverting the majority of the water to his own pastures. It was a declaration of war, a slow, deliberate strangling of Wyatt's ranch. The Rosewood farm was not spared. Thorne, knowing Wyatt's connection to the family, began to apply pressure there as well. He filed a legal claim questioning the Rosewoods' official property line, alleging that their most fertile pasture actually belonged to him. It was a frivolous claim, but one that would cost Patrick Rosewood time and money he didn't have to fight in court. Thorne's cowboys, emboldened by their boss, became more brazen, riding close to the Rosewood home, their presence a constant low-grade threat. Redemption Creek became a town divided. Some, indebted to Thorne or fearful of his power, sided with him. They whispered that Harrison was a fool who had brought this trouble on himself by spurning a man like Thorn over a scarred, plain-faced girl. Others who respected Wyatt and the Rosewoods offered their support in hushed tones, but were reluctant to act openly against the valley's most powerful man. Wyatt knew he couldn't fight this battle through legal channels or appeals to fairness. Thorn owned the local magistrate and held the town's economy in his fist. This was a siege, and it had to be met with the tactics of a soldier. His quiet, peaceful demeanor receded, replaced by the sharp, strategic mind that had kept him alive during the war. He called a meeting at his ranch. He invited Patrick Rosewood and a few other small ranchers who had also suffered under Thorn's thumb. To his surprise, Josephine came with her father. Annabel remained at home, terrified of the escalating conflict and unable to comprehend why Wyatt's stubbornness was bringing such ruin down upon them all. In Wyatt's simple, rugged ranch house, he laid out a map of the valley on his table. "Thorn thinks he can starve us out one by one," Wyatt said, his voice calm and authoritative. "He's wrong. We're going to work together. We'll pool our resources, share our water, and post guards on our herds. We will not let him break us." It was Josephine who saw the flaw. "He controls the water source, Wyatt. Sharing what little we have will only make us all weaker, slower. He'll win eventually." She pointed to a different part of the map, to a series of high rocky canyons on the far side of Wyatt's property. "Old maps call this area Beaver's Rest. They say there are natural springs up there. If we could find them, we could dig an irrigation ditch. It would be hard work, but it would bypass his dam completely." The other men looked at her in surprise. Patrick beamed with pride. Wyatt looked at her with something more. She wasn't just offering support, she was offering a strategy. She saw the battlefield as clearly as he did. "It's a long shot," one of the ranchers, a man named Henderson, grumbled. "That's rough country." "It's the only shot we have," Wyatt said, his eyes on Joe. "Miss Rosewood is right." The work was brutal. Under the relentless Montana sun, Wyatt Joe Patrick and the handful of allied ranchers began their monumental task. Wyatt, using his military engineering experience, plotted the most direct course for the ditch. Joe, with her intimate knowledge of the land, identified the best soil to cut through and the rockiest ground to avoid. She worked alongside the men, her small frame belying a fierce strength and an unflagging spirit. She drove wagons, hauled rock, and swung a pickaxe until her good hand was raw. Annabel visited the worksite once. She arrived in a pretty dress, carrying a basket with a jug of lemonade, a caricature of a supportive woman. She looked at the sweat-drenched, dirt-caked workers, at her sister, laboring like a man, and at the ugly, deep scar they were carving into the earth. The reality of the struggle, the sheer physical ugliness of it, repulsed her. "This is madness," she said to Wyatt, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? All you have to do is apologize to Mr. Thorn. Give him what he wants. And what is it he wants?" "Annabel," Wyatt asked, his voice dangerously quiet as he leaned on his shovel. "He wants respect. He wants me." She finally admitted, the words bursting out. "If you would just step aside, this would all be over." Wyatt stared at her, his expression a mixture of pity and contempt. "It was never about you," he said coldly. "It's about the land. It's about a bully who thinks he can take whatever he wants, and I will never, ever step aside for a man like that." He turned his back on her and went back to his work, standing shoulder to shoulder with her sister. Annabel fled in tears, her fantasy world finally and irrevocably shattered. She was not the prize. She was just an excuse. Thorn, seeing his plan to strangle them slowly was failing, escalated his tactics. His riders began to harass the work crew, firing shots over their heads, trying to spook their horses. One night they set fire to Henderson's hay barn, a clear warning of what was to come. The siege was no longer metaphorical. It was real, and it was turning deadly. Wyatt organized the ranchers into a defensive militia. They worked on the ditch by day and stood guard by night, their rifles always within reach. The Broken Spur Ranch became an armed camp. Through it all, Josephine was Wyatt's shadow, his lieutenant. She was fearless. When Thorne's men rode too close, she stood her ground, a rifle held in her hands, with steady competence. She tended to the men's minor injuries, rationed their dwindling food supplies, and offered quiet encouragement when their morale faltered. She had spent her life in shadows, but here in the midst of a war for survival, she had stepped into the light, and she was magnificent. One evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans and coffee by the campfire, watching the stars emerge in the vast, dark sky, Wyatt looked at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair was a mess, and she looked utterly exhausted. He had never seen anyone more beautiful. "Are you scared?" he asked her. "Every minute," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the flames. "But I've been scared before. This time is different." "How?" She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "This time," she said, "I know what I'm fighting for." The air at the Broken Spur grew thick with the metallic taste of impending violence. Scouts reported that Thorne was gathering his men, not just his regular ranch hands, but hired guns from out-of-the-territory men with cold eyes and notched pistol grips. The irrigation ditch was nearly complete. Thorne knew his window for action was closing. He was coming to end it, not with legal tricks or petty harassment, but with fire and lead. Wyatt prepared his small force for a final confrontation. The ranch house became a fortress, its windows boarded up. The ranchers, now battle-hardened and united by a common cause, took up defensive positions in the barn, the bunkhouse, and behind the stone walls of the corral. They were outnumbered, but they were defending their homes, their very existence. Patrick Rosewood insisted on staying his old hunting rifle, held with a grim determination. He sent a trusted farmhand to take Annabelle into town to the safety of the sheriff's office. But Annabelle, in a surprising act of defiance, refused. Racked with guilt and terror, she had slipped out of the house and hidden herself in the cellar of the Rosewood home, unable to flee, but too terrified to fight. The attack came just after dawn. Thorne and his 20 riders stormed the valley, their war cries splitting the morning silence. The first volley of shots ripped through the air, splintering wood and kicking up dust. Wyatt, positioned in the hayloft of the barn, directed the defense with the calm precision of a seasoned officer. Beside him, Josephine loaded rifles, her movements swift and sure, her face set with a fierce resolve. She was no longer just a healer or a farm girl. She was a soldier in the line of fire. The battle raged for hours. Thorne's men, expecting a quick rout of simple farmers, were met with disciplined, accurate fire. They were pinned down, unable to advance on the ranch house. Thorne, enraged by the resistance, changed his tactics. He sent a group of men to circle around and attack the source of his frustration, the Rosewood farm itself. If he couldn't break Harrison directly, he would burn down the thing he seemed to care about most. Wyatt saw the riders break off, heading straight for the vulnerable farm. "Joe, stay here! Keep them suppressed!" he yelled before sliding down the ladder and racing towards his stallion. Patrick, seeing his home threatened, ran with him. They galloped across the pasture bullets, whining past their ears, a desperate race against the torch. They arrived just as Thorne's men were splashing kerosene on the side of the house. The cellar. Wyatt's heart seized. He knew Annabelle was at the farm, but he didn't know where. The fight at the Rosewood home was brutal and close-quartered. Wyatt and Patrick fought with a desperate fury, using the woodpile and the water trough for cover. But they were only 2 men against 5. One of Thorne's men managed to light a torch and hurl it onto the porch. Flames began to lick up the dry wood. It was then that Annabel, choked by smoke and driven by a terror that finally overwhelmed her paralysis, burst from the cellar door. She stood there, silhouetted against the growing flames, a perfect, terrified target. One of Thorne's men, a vicious brute named Corrigan, grinned and raised his pistol, aiming directly at her. At that exact moment, from the direction of the broken spur, another gunshot rang out sharp and clear. Corrigan cried out and crumpled to the ground, his pistol clattering on the dirt. Wyatt looked back and saw Josephine standing exposed at the edge of the battle, a rifle braced against her shoulder, its barrel still smoking. She had abandoned her safe position to save the sister who had been the source of all her pain. The sight of Josephine, so brave and vulnerable, broke something in Annabel. The years of guilt, jealousy, and fear erupted. She ran not towards the safety of the barn, but towards Wyatt, her face a mask of crazed desperation. "Stop this! Just stop!" she screamed at him, grabbing his arm as he tried to take aim. "It's my fault, all of it. The fire. The old fire. I did it. I left her there. I was jealous. Do you hear me? She's only like this because of me. I'm the monster. Just give Thorne what he wants. Give him me. This is all my fault." Her confession shrieked over the roar of gunfire, and crackling flames was the final devastating truth laid bare. Patrick stared at his beautiful daughter, the confirmation of the suspicion he had buried deep in his heart for 13 years, his face collapsing in grief. Wyatt, his face like stone, shoved her behind him. "Get down!" he roared. The distraction had been costly. Thorne himself, seeing his opportunity, charged forward on his white stallion, his gun drawn. But he wasn't aiming for Wyatt. He was aiming for Josephine. He would eliminate the true source of Harrison's defiance. Wyatt saw the move. There was no time to aim, no time to think. He launched himself at Thorne's horse, a desperate flying tackle that brought man and beast crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. He and Thorne rolled in the dirt, a desperate grunting struggle for the fallen pistol. Meanwhile, Josephine, having reloaded, saw one of Thorne's remaining men take aim at her father. Without a thought, she stepped directly into the line of fire, shielding Patrick with her own body. The bullet tore through the flesh of her shoulder, spinning her around. She cried out in pain, but she did not fall. She raised her own rifle and fired her shot, going true. The chaos ended as suddenly as it began. Thorne, momentarily stunned by his fall, found Wyatt's pistol pressed against his temple. His remaining men, seeing their leader captured and their numbers dwindling, lost their nerve and fled. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackle of the fire on the porch and Josephine's pained gasps. Wyatt, his rage a cold, controlled fire, hauled Thorne to his feet, but his attention was already elsewhere. He shoved the captured rancher into Patrick's custody and ran to Jo. He reached her as her knees buckled, catching her before she hit the ground. He gently tore her sleeve, revealing the bloody wound. It was a clean shot through and through, but it was deep. He looked into her eyes, his own filled with a fierce, protective love. "Why?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Why would you do that for him, for her?" Josephine looked past him, her pain-filled gaze landing on her sister, who was huddled on the ground, weeping uncontrollably. Then she looked at her father, whose face was a ruin of grief and dawning understanding. "Because they are my family," Josephine whispered, her hand, her scarred hand, coming up to touch his face. "And you are my home." In the shadow of the burning farmhouse, surrounded by the wreckage of their past and the violence of the present, the truth had finally burned everything clean. The scars were no longer just on Josephine's skin. They were laid bare on the soul of the Rosewood family, and only now could the healing truly begin. In the aftermath, peace settled over the valley. Bartholomew Thorne was taken into custody, his empire of intimidation destined to crumble under the weight of his crimes. The newly finished irrigation ditch, a testament to their shared struggle, brought life-giving water to the parched land. At the Rosewood farm, the fire-blackened porch stood as a monument to the painful truths that had been revealed. The family was fractured, but free of secrets, leaving Annabel to begin the long, quiet journey toward earning forgiveness. A week later, Wyatt found Josephine on his porch as the sun set her arm in a sling. He sat beside her, the comfortable silence a language of its own. "When I first came here," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I thought I was just buying land. I was wrong. I was looking for you." He reached out his thumb, gently tracing the scars on her cheek. He saw not tragedy, but the fierce strength and profound loyalty of the woman who had endured. "Every man in this valley saw your sister's beauty," he said, his eyes holding hers. "They saw the sun, but the sun can be blinding. I saw you, Joe. You are like the earth itself. Scarred, yes. Tested by fire. But everything that is real, everything that lasts, everything that grows, it comes from you." Tears of release, not sorrow, welled in Josephine's eyes. He leaned in and kissed her, a promise of shared sunrises and a life built on unshakable truth. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found his home. As the first stars appeared, two scarred survivors sat together, ready to face the new day, their future defined not by perfection, but by the resilient strength they had found in each other. And so, in a world that prized flawless exteriors, Wyatt Harrison chose the woman whose beauty was etched in her resilience. He looked past the golden hair and saw the iron will. He looked past the perfect smile and saw the unbreakable spirit. Theirs is a story that reminds us that true strength isn't about avoiding scars, but about having the courage to bear them. It teaches us that the most profound love isn't found in the spotlight, but often waits quietly in the shadows, ready to heal, to build, and to endure. If this story of truth, sacrifice, and unconventional love resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story with real heart, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the Old West that dig deeper than the dust. Thank you for listening.